Well, good morning again. So we're going to keep asking this question. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Or maybe you could also say, what is a follower of Jesus supposed to do? We know what we believe, but what makes a life with Jesus different than any other life? And that's really what discipleship is. The walk we do, the things we do. And today, Jesus gets into the topic of reconciliation. Jesus is kind of interesting. He doesn't mandate to his disciples that there's certain clothing we have to wear or certain foods we can or can't eat. He doesn't mandate what times a day we should pray. He doesn't get into those kind of rules. Those are kind of disciplines he leaves us to figure out. But he does mandate that when we are going to the altar to make our donation, that we should first go to anyone who has a grudge against us and reconcile with them first. So you go, why? Why that rule? I mean, why does Jesus care about, why is that a command? We all have people who don't like us. I mean, I can't possibly make up with all of them. I mean, some of us have jobs where people being mad at us is kind of built into the position, right? You could be a cop or a judge or a building inspector or a pastor. Oh, sorry, everyone loves pastors. And even if it's just one or two people in the church, that can still be hard. You know, I mean, that's going up to someone who you know is unhappy with you and who you know is going to air their grievances at you and tell you things you don't want to hear. And some of them may be untrue. Some of them could be misunderstandings. But there's also the possibility that they're right. And then I have to hear what I actually did wrong, and nobody wants to do that. And the amount of nervousness and anxiety that takes when you pick up the phone to make that call. I know people who've hyperventilated, right, at the thought of at the nervousness of having to make that call, that confrontation. It makes close rules seem kind of easy. But Jesus sees reconciliation as more important. Somehow, people being angry at one another in the church is a more destructive thing. And confronting our anger issues with one another is more helpful than the other acts of religious piety. Look at what he says. If you are angry with a brother or sister, you are liable to judgment. So let's talk about anger, because we know anger can be destructive, and I think it's also very misunderstood. Anger is, if you had to give you a definition, anger is feeling hurt and powerless at the same time. So it's feeling hurt but being powerless. You have to have both of those for anger to really be. So I'll give you a simple example. Right? We all kind of remember this as a kid. You go around and you get bullied by someone. And the bully always picks on somebody they know who isn't either willing or able to fight back. And don't listen to all those podcasters telling you that we need to bring back bullying because it made people stronger and we were tougher. It doesn't. It just makes people really hurt. And don't listen to those who say, yeah, you know, I got bullied, but my dad, he took me out back and he taught me how to fight. So when that bully came back, I clocked him hard and he never came back. I learned my lesson. Violence solves things. I'm like, that's the lesson you want to get? But the truth is, that rarely happens. You know why? Because if the bully thought you were going to clock him, they wouldn't have bullied you in the first place. It's why Mike Tyson said when he went to prison, nobody bothered him. Well, yeah, he's got arms like this. He'll clock you and take your ear out. Literally. Yeah, of course they left him alone. They're not going to bully him. And we know bullying can be physical. We know it can be emotional too. Right? Excluding someone, telling lies. The whole point is that there's this power imbalance between the person making you feel powerless and enjoying it and the other person they're picking on. And how does it make you feel? Well, you get angry. And you sit and imagine. You sit in your mind, you start imagining revenge scenarios. Oh yeah, I'll get back. Oh yeah, I'll get them. But of course, you won't actually do it because if you could, you would have already done it. And you would have stopped. So you're being hurt, or they're doing something to you that's maybe humiliating or demeaning, but you can't stop it. That's anger. Feeling hurt plus being powerless to stop it. And being angry is not a sign of strength, it's really a sign of weakness. You think of all those guys that run around smacking their partners and screaming and raging when they don't get the obedience they want, or they think they might be cheating on them, or why don't you give me your phone pass, or whatever it is. They're acting that way because they feel powerless and they're trying to reassert control. They get more angry when the other person starts looking like they're going to leave because that's losing all control. That's taking away the power. Anger problems at their root are about feeling powerless. And they can fester. And they can lead to explosions. And we've seen that in our country. Or they could lead to self-harm. I can't take it out on anyone else. I'll take it on myself. I'll turn it inward. But it's a big problem. And since our society that we live in is so atomized, so many of us live far away from family. So many are not a part of anything in any community. There's not that group around us to give us that sense of belonging or to help talk us through things when it happens. That when you feel hurt at something you can't change, who are you going to talk to about it? Because everyone is weaker than someone somewhere. We're all getting screwed over by someone somehow. Our world is unjust. How do we deal with it? But now, I know what you're going to tell me. But Lars, didn't Jesus go to the temple and see things that made him very angry, and then he constructed a whip? It actually says then he made the whip. I don't know how long he sat there in the temple, tying the knot together and then tying the little things at the end, maybe like little rocks or something. And he made the whip, and then he took the whip, and then he knocked things over. You're right, he did. He got very mad. He saw stuff going on that he wasn't pleased with, and he's not in charge. He's not the one who runs the temple. So he lashed out. That's part of what got him killed. That's what we call righteous anger. Right? When we think about it, you get mad at an injustice. You see innocents being hurt or taken advantage of, and you know that you have to do something, but you don't really have the power to change it. You're not a king. So your heart goes out and you feel bad for them, so you lash out. What do? You block something, you call people in power, you scream at their office, you do something. That's a righteous anger. And it's different from, I'm mad that I'm not getting what I want. Or I'm angry they didn't agree with me and tell me they do what I told them to do. Or I'm entitled to this, and they're not giving it to me, so I'm going to blow up. Okay, we get this. I think most of us get this. Being mad at mistreatment of the poor is different than being mad because you didn't get what you want. I get it. But Jesus doesn't say, if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable for judgment, except if that anger is the right kind of justified anger. And make sure you figure out which kind it is first, before you start knocking things over. Jesus doesn't make an exception, even for himself. So now what do you do with that? If I follow Jesus, and I get mad at something that's wrong, but I'm still liable for judgment for the anger, oh man, I can't win. So this is where I think as Christians we kind of mistake Jesus' thinking. You see, we think of rules in terms of rules and exceptions. That's kind of how our world works, right? You can't do this, but sometimes situations come up where you can, right? So, say the rule is you can't work on the Sabbath. I'll pick a simple one, right? You can't work on the Sabbath, but you're an ER doctor. And you're driving down the road, and there's a bicyclist who got hit. And the person's sitting in the ditch lying there, bleeding out. And you're like, well, it's the Sabbath. God forbids me working. And there isn't a rabbi in this world that's going to tell you, oh yeah, let the person bleed out on the Sabbath. Right? So we understand. We have the rule, but we make exceptions to it. Right? We make exceptions. We understand sometimes that there's a greater good. We understand that when the city tells you, you see somebody hungry, but you can't feed them in that spot unless you get a permit, then it might be okay to sneak them a sandwich. We understand when the law used to say, send the runaway slaves back, that the right thing was to disobey the law and help them move north. But that's still rules thinking. You have a law, sometimes it doesn't work, so you carve out an exception. So the law can become kind of like a big block of Swiss cheese, and if you're smart enough, you can worm your way through all the holes. Kind of like the kids in the car. I've probably used this one before, right? Don't touch your brother. We got 4 hours to Seattle. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. Technically, yes. But the interesting thing is Jesus doesn't ever make exceptions to rules. He doesn't ever say, you have heard it said, but don't do this, except. He never says except. He doesn't say you're liable for judgment except if it's good anger. He doesn't say go be reconciled unless the person's a jerk and won't listen. He doesn't say love your enemies except the ones who are really smarmy and smug and laugh at you. He makes the standard, he sets the expectation, and that's it. Jesus thinks differently than we do. He isn't making rules and exceptions. He's giving us the expectations that we should follow as people who worship the Lord God for what our lives should be like. And he holds that bar right up there at the top. He doesn't lower it to make it easier to get under. And he knows that we live in a messy world full of messy situations with laws that can't always be followed to the letter. But he also knows that's still not meeting the expectations. That's the burden we bear when we have hard choices to make that go against what Jesus expects. So one of the things I've been doing, this whole kind of Lent, I've been picking the gospel verses based on ones that were used in Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, Cost of Discipleship. And again, you may remember he was the Lutheran pastor who got involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. And he joined this kind of secret group. He was not the ringleader. He didn't actually ever use a gun. Mostly what he did was smuggle intelligence out of the country. He gets glorified for doing this. He was the hero who embraced his destiny. But the truth is, he always was conflicted about what he did. He might have thought that this murder of this particular dictator was necessary, but it was always a necessary evil. And it was still evil even if the guy was really evil. Even a necessary evil is still an evil. So he was always conflicted about it. I think movies today, they don't like that portrayal. They want him to sort of pick up the gun and go, yeah! He never did that. He knew that God upholds the bar that says do not kill even when the messy world doesn't give you a good choice. So I may have anger against someone for what they did. I definitely have anger against certain people for certain things. And I might know in my mind that it's justified. The person is horrible. I'll even say we should all be angry about this. But I'm still liable for judgment because it's still not God's wish for us. God's wish is a world without the power for some people to create the conditions of anger in others. God's wish is a world where people aren't hurt. God's wish is for a world for everyone to come clean. and not carry the burden of the anger or the hurts that we cause others. And God's not going to lower that wish and that hope and that expectation because it's hard. So yeah, going back to that person with the grudge against you before going to the altar, it's a big burden. Calling that person is never fun. I'm not enthused about it either. And it is one thing as a pastor you sometimes have to do. You call them, how you been? And then the phone gets loud. And you listen. All right. And you breathe deep. And you say, okay, I'm not going to get defensive. I'm not going to get defensive. Emotionally, I'm very defensive. I'm going, no, that point's wrong. No, that point's wrong. No, I definitely didn't do that. No, you're mistaken. But I'm like, breathe deep, breathe deep. It doesn't mean it resolves it. But that's what it's like trying to do that. It's also not fun living with others hurt and powerless from what I've done. I want them to be free of that. And that requires me to go back and reconcile as best I can, whether it works or not, to relieve that burden. Amen.